your hand, make a fist, put another fist next to it, and that is about the size of your brain. But unlike your hands, your brain is insanely complex, so complex in fact, that there are some parts of your brain that we don't even know what they do. Your brain has two halves, connected primarily by a bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. And altogether, your brain consists of three major sections, each of which has their own subsections, but all of which are surrounded by a super thin layer of gray matter called the cerebral cortex, which helps you with so much that if I listed it all out, it would look like the beginning of a Star Wars movie. Anyway, let's start with the hindbrain, which contains the brainstem. The brainstem connects our spine to our brain, and without it, you couldn't control your body at all. The brainstem consists of the medulla and the pons, which work together for basic survival tasks like heart rate and breathing, reflex control, and even sleep regulation. Right next to the brainstem is this big lump here, known as the cerebellum. The cerebellum's primary function is regulation of motor control and balance. And that covers the hindbrain, but there's one last part of the brainstem we didn't talk about, and that's because it's the entire next section of your brain, the midbrain, and it's definitely the midbrain. The only thing I'm going to talk about here is the reticular formation, which is essentially your brain's alarm system. Your reticular formation maintains your awakeness and alertness, so if you're having a sluggish day, your reticular formation, it ain't doing much. And that's 2 out of our 3 brain regions done, covered, and I bet the last one will be just as quick and easy. The forebrain is split into 4 sections called lobes. Let's start in the back, right above the cerebellum. This area is called the occipital lobe, and it handles our vision. But simply, it lets you see. This is why, in combat sports like boxing, you're not allowed to punch someone in the back of the head. On the side of your brain are the temporal lobes, and it's not a coincidence that these bad boys are placed right where your ears are. But simply, they let you hear. There's actually a special part of your temporal lobe called Wernicke's area. It helps specifically understand language processing. But this is not to be confused with Broca's area, which is a different specialized part of the brain that deals with speech production. Broca's area is also in a completely different part of the brain known as the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is also home to the motor cortex, which helps deal with bodily movements but is different than the cerebellum. Although both areas play a key role in your body movement, the motor cortex is more of the director, the boss. It starts the movement conversation, whereas the cerebellum responds more to sensory information to fine-tune movement. Now there's one more part of the frontal lobe I want to talk about, and it's one of the biggest parts of your frontal lobe called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for high-level thinking, like decision-making, planning, and logical reasoning. Okay, now pause for a second. You know that one person in your life from maybe school or work that's pretty extroverted, they hang out with a few different groups of people, and if they didn't show up to school or work, you definitely notice. Well, I've got one of those in my life, and their name is the limbic system. Weird name though, right? The limbic system resides mostly in the frontal and temporal lobes and consists of 4 major parts. The hippocampus primarily handles memory, and if you saw a hippo on campus, you'd never forget it. The amygdala handles emotion, especially extreme emotion like fear. When you get jump scared in a haunted house, are you beating that person up or are you running away in terror? I don't know, ask your amygdala. The hypothalamus primarily helps regulate homeostasis, making sure you eat when you're hungry and you get a blanket when you're cold. Now, hypothalamus literally means below the thalamus, so right above the hypothalamus is the inconveniently named thalamus. The thalamus is a sensory information highway that makes sure sensory data goes where it should in your brain and vice versa. Some of the cars on this highway, particularly the touch cars, travel to the somatosensory cortex, which resides in the parietal lobe. Now, does this cover every single part of the brain? No, absolutely not even close. But we did cover a lot of the major parts of the brain and their functions, so when I reference these parts of the brain in future videos, you'll at least have some understanding of what we're talking about. Things to remember. Your brain is split into 3 sections, and the biggest of which, your forebrain, is split into 4 lobes. Broca's area is for speech, while Wernicke's area is for understanding language. And of course, the brain is extremely complex, and while some parts of your brain may be more responsible for certain actions than others, it's not as simple as having one part of your brain mapped to one responsibility.